Welcome to the Discourse Analyzer AI Toolkit, where articles come alive. You're listening to the audio version of our article. For the full text and an interactive experience, check out the link in the description below. Interact with any selection using our AI assistant to enhance your understanding. Let's explore.
Public sentiment in discourse analysis. Public sentiment refers to the collective emotions, opinions, and attitudes expressed by a population regarding particular social, political, or cultural issues. In discourse analysis, public sentiment is studied to understand how language, media, and communication shape and reflect the moods and perspectives of the public. Public sentiment is not just an emotional reaction. It is constructed and negotiated through discourse, making it a dynamic and context-dependent phenomenon. By analyzing the language used in media, political speeches, social media, and other forms of public discourse, researchers can explore how public sentiment is influenced by specific framing, rhetoric, and narratives. Discourse analysis of public sentiment focuses on how language shapes collective beliefs and emotional responses, how societal values are reinforced or challenged, and how public opinion shifts over time. Key features of public sentiment in discourse analysis. Point 1. Framing of issues and sentiment. The way issues are framed in discourse significantly influences public sentiment. Different framings can evoke distinct emotional responses from the public, such as anger, hope, fear, or empathy. Discourse analysis examines how specific frames shape the way people interpret and feel about an issue. Example: in media coverage of refugee crises, framing the issue as a humanitarian disaster versus a threat to national security elicits very different public sentiments. Discourse analysis would investigate how the use of compassionate language in the first frame encourages empathy and support for refugees, while the second frame might trigger fear or resentment toward them. Point 2. Emotionally charged language. Public sentiment is often shaped by the use of emotionally charged language in public discourse. Certain words, metaphors, or rhetorical devices can amplify emotions such as anger, fear, pride, or sadness, influencing how the public feels about an issue or event. Example: in political discourse, terms like terrorism or threat are often used to provoke fear and urgency, leading the public to support more aggressive security measures. Discourse analysis would explore how the repetition of these emotionally charged terms shapes public sentiment, guiding people toward specific attitudes and responses. Point 3. Collective identity and sentiment. Public sentiment is closely tied to the construction of collective identity, as people often align their emotions and opinions with those of their perceived in-group. Discourse analysis looks at how language constructs group identities and how these identities influence collective emotions. Example: in nationalist discourse, phrases like "we, the people," or "our shared heritage," create a sense of unity and belonging, evoking public sentiments of pride and solidarity. Discourse analysis would explore how this collective identity is constructed through language and how it fosters a sense of shared values and emotional alignment within a group. Point 4. Narratives and public sentiment. Narratives play a crucial role in shaping public sentiment. By telling stories that resonate with people's values, experiences, or fears, public discourse can evoke strong emotional responses and shape collective attitudes. These narratives can either reinforce existing sentiments or challenge them, leading to shifts in public opinion. Example: during economic crises, political leaders might tell narratives about resilience and recovery, using metaphors like weathering the storm or getting back on our feet to foster hope and confidence in the future. Discourse analysis would examine how these narratives are constructed to uplift public sentiment and restore trust in leadership during challenging times. Point 5. Social media and amplification of public sentiment. In the digital age, social media platforms play a major role in amplifying public sentiment. The viral nature of social media allows certain discourses, emotions, and opinions to spread rapidly, often leading to heightened emotional responses and collective action. Discourse analysis of social media focuses on how hashtags, memes, and viral content contribute to the formation and expression of public sentiment. Example: The hashtag #MeToo movement used social media to amplify public sentiment around sexual harassment and assault. By sharing personal stories under the hashtag, individuals contributed to a collective outpouring of anger and solidarity, which shaped the public discourse on gender, power, and accountability. Discourse analysis would focus on how the language used in these posts both reflected and shaped public sentiment. Point 6. Shifts in public sentiment over time. Public sentiment is not static. It can shift over time as new information, events, or discourses emerge. Discourse analysis can track how these shifts occur by analyzing changes in language, framing, and media coverage. By examining how certain discourses gain or lose prominence, researchers can understand how public sentiment evolves. Example: public sentiment around same-sex marriage has shifted significantly in many countries over the past few decades. Discourse analysis would examine how media, political leaders, and social movements have framed the issue over time, moving from moral opposition to legal equality, and how this has contributed to changing public attitudes toward LGBTQ+ rights. Methods for analyzing public sentiment in discourse. Point 1. Framing analysis. Framing analysis focuses on how issues are presented in public discourse and how these presentations influence public sentiment. By examining which aspects of a topic are emphasized or downplayed, framing analysis reveals how language shapes public emotions and attitudes. Example: in media coverage of environmental issues, framing analysis might reveal that the issue is framed as an urgent crisis, requiring immediate action, which generates public anxiety and concern. Alternatively, framing the issue as manageable or slow-moving might lead to complacency or lower public engagement. Discourse analysis would investigate how these frames direct public sentiment toward different emotional responses and levels of activism. Point 2. Critical discourse analysis, CDA. Critical discourse analysis, CDA, explores how power relations, ideologies, and social structures shape public sentiment through discourse. CDA investigates how language in media, politics, and social institutions constructs public emotions and perceptions, often revealing how dominant ideologies influence the collective mood. Example: a CDA of political rhetoric during times of war might reveal how language constructs an emotional appeal to patriotism and sacrifice by framing war as a noble cause, and soldiers as heroes. This analysis would uncover how such language fosters public support for military action while silencing anti-war sentiment. Point 3. Sentiment analysis. Sentiment analysis uses computational tools to analyze large datasets of text, often from social media, to detect positive, negative, or neutral public sentiment. This method helps track public emotions over time, revealing patterns in how people respond to certain events or topics. Example: in studying public sentiment during an election campaign, sentiment analysis might track how social media users express positive or negative emotions about a particular candidate. Discourse analysis would complement this by investigating the language choices that contribute to these sentiments, such as the use of slogans, emotional appeals, or attacks on opponents. Point 4. Narrative analysis. Narrative analysis examines how stories and narratives in public discourse shape public sentiment by creating emotional connections with audiences. By analyzing the structure, themes, and language of these narratives, discourse analysts can reveal how certain stories evoke public emotions and align collective attitudes. Example: during the COVID-19 pandemic, political leaders and the media told stories about frontline healthcare workers as heroes, fighting to save lives, which shaped public sentiment around the need for collective responsibility and support for healthcare systems. Discourse analysis would focus on how these narratives fostered feelings of solidarity and urgency in the public. Examples of public sentiment in discourse analysis. Example 1. Public sentiment in media coverage of terrorism. Media coverage of terrorism often uses emotionally charged language to shape public sentiment around fear and security. Discourse analysis might focus on how terms like terrorist threat, homegrown extremism, and war on terror are used to evoke fear and justify policies aimed at national security. The analysis would reveal how these discourses influence public sentiment by framing terrorism as an ever-present danger, fostering a climate of fear that supports restrictive measures such as increased surveillance or military intervention. Example 2. Public sentiment in social media movements. In the hashtag Black Lives Matter movement, social media has played a key role in shaping public sentiment around racial justice. By analyzing the language used in viral posts, hashtags, and protest slogans, discourse analysis would reveal how the movement has constructed public sentiments of anger, grief, and solidarity. For example, hashtags like #say their names evoke emotional connections to the victims of police violence, fostering a collective demand for justice and systemic change. Example 3. Public sentiment in political campaigns. Political campaigns often manipulate public sentiment through carefully crafted language, slogans, and emotional appeals. Discourse analysis of Donald Trump's 2016 presidential campaign, for example, would explore how language like "Make America Great Again" and "America First" tapped into public sentiment around nationalism, economic insecurity, and dissatisfaction with the political establishment. The analysis would reveal how these slogans were designed to evoke pride, anger, and fear, contributing to a sense of political identity and mobilizing voter support. Example 4. Public sentiment in environmental activism. Public sentiment around climate change has evolved significantly over the past few decades. Discourse analysis might examine how environmental activists, media, and politicians have framed the issue as a climate crisis or global emergency, to evoke urgency and fear. This framing has contributed to shifting public sentiment toward greater concern for the environment and support for policies aimed at combating climate change. The analysis would reveal how language has been used to shift the narrative from one of scientific debate to a moral imperative for action. Challenges in analyzing public sentiment through discourse. Point 1. Complexity of emotions. Public sentiment is complex and multi-layered, often involving a mix of emotions such as fear, hope, anger, and pride. Discourse analysts must navigate this complexity to accurately interpret the emotions expressed in public discourse and understand how different emotions intersect. Point 2. Rapid shifts in sentiment. Public sentiment can shift quickly, especially in response to breaking news, political events, or social media trends. Discourse analysts need to account for these rapid changes and be able to track how language and discourse evolve in real time to reflect these shifts. Point 3. Cultural and contextual differences. Public sentiment is often influenced by cultural and contextual factors that shape how different groups perceive and respond to issues. Discourse analysts must be aware of these factors to avoid overgeneralizing or misinterpreting the emotions and opinions of specific communities. Conclusion. Public sentiment is a powerful force in shaping societal attitudes and political outcomes, and discourse analysis provides valuable insights into how language influences collective emotions and opinions. By examining the framing of issues, the use of emotional appeals, the construction of narratives, and the role of social media, discourse analysts can uncover how public sentiment is constructed and mobilized in different contexts. Whether analyzing media coverage, political rhetoric, or social movements, discourse analysis reveals the intricate ways in which language shapes public emotions, contributing to shifts in public opinion and societal change. Frequently asked questions. What is public sentiment in discourse analysis? Public sentiment refers to the collective emotions, opinions, and attitudes expressed by a population on specific issues. In discourse analysis, public sentiment is examined to understand how language, media, and communication shape or reflect the public's mood and perspectives on political, social, or cultural topics. How does framing influence public sentiment in discourse analysis? Framing is crucial in shaping how the public feels about an issue. Different framings, such as presenting immigration as a humanitarian issue versus a security threat, evoke different emotional responses, such as empathy or fear. Discourse analysis explores how these frames guide public sentiment and shape collective reactions. How does emotionally charged language shape public sentiment? Emotionally charged language, such as metaphors or specific words like crisis or threat, can amplify public emotions like fear, pride, or anger. Discourse analysis looks at how these language choices influence public attitudes, often pushing people toward specific responses or actions. What role does collective identity play in shaping public sentiment? Collective identities, built through language in political or social discourse, help unify people around shared beliefs and emotions. By analyzing how discourse constructs these identities, e.g., we, the people, or our nation, researchers can reveal how these identities influence public sentiment, fostering solidarity or division. How do narratives affect public sentiment in discourse analysis? Narratives, or stories told in public discourse, can evoke strong emotional connections. For example, during economic downturns, narratives of resilience can foster hope and confidence. Discourse analysis examines how such narratives influence collective attitudes and shape public emotions. What is the role of social media in amplifying public sentiment? Social media platforms can rapidly amplify public sentiment through viral content, hashtags, and memes. Discourse analysis of social media looks at how these digital interactions shape collective emotions and contribute to movements, such as the #MeToo campaign, which used personal stories to amplify public outrage and solidarity. How does discourse analysis track shifts in public sentiment over time? By analyzing language changes, shifts in media framing, and evolving public discourse, researchers can trace how public sentiment moves over time. Discourse analysis helps explain how attitudes toward issues like same-sex marriage or climate change have shifted, reflecting new societal values. What methods are used to analyze public sentiment in discourse analysis? Framing analysis examines how issues are presented to influence public sentiment by highlighting or downplaying specific aspects. Critical discourse analysis, CDA, explores how language reflects power relations, ideologies, and social structures, shaping public emotions. Sentiment analysis uses computational tools to detect positive, negative, or neutral sentiments in large datasets, often from social media. Narrative analysis investigates how stories told in public discourse shape collective attitudes and emotional responses. How can discourse analysis be applied to public sentiment during political campaigns? In political campaigns, discourse analysis can reveal how slogans and emotionally charged language shape voter sentiment. For instance, phrases like, "Make America Great Again," tap into feelings of nostalgia, nationalism, and fear, influencing voter behavior and identity. What challenges arise in analyzing public sentiment through discourse analysis? Complexity of emotions. Public sentiment often involves a mix of emotions, making it challenging to interpret all factors. Rapid shifts. Public sentiment can change quickly, especially with breaking news or social media trends, requiring real-time tracking. Cultural context. Differences in cultural and social contexts can impact how public sentiment is expressed and interpreted, complicating analysis.